Hi, dear senior students. How are you? How's everything going? Is anything interesting happening in your lives lately? Well, I hope everything's going fine with you and your families. In today's video, we're going to continue talking about speaking. But now we're going to move to the integrated task, but to the academic task. So last week we were talking about the campus situation. Now we're going to speak about the academic situation. So here is it's the same, right? You're gonna read a passage, then you're going to listen, and then you're going to answer a question. You will see the task that you are asked to do in the question. Now the difference is that now the situation that you are presented is more academic. The reading passage is going to be related about, or it's going to be about a subject or a lecture, and then you're going to listen to a professor talking about a topic, an academic topic. Well, let's start.
Please listen carefully. In this question, you will read a short passage on an academic subject and then listen to part of a lecture on the same topic. You will then answer a question using information from both the reading passage and the lecture. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Read the passage about symbiotic relationships. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now.
This is an example of how this part looks in the real test. Here we see that we have 45 seconds to read this passage. You see that this passage is more academic, and the lecture that we are going to listen after this is going to be related to the same topic. Here you see the time, so we still have a couple of seconds, and then we will move to the listening, to the lecture.
Now listen to part of a lecture on this topic in a biology class.
We have been discussing the three symbiotic relationships between species. Mutualism, in which both organisms benefit. Parasitism, in which one benefits and the other is harmed. And commensalism, where one benefits while neither benefiting nor harming the other.
The professor gives two examples of symbiotic relationships that change. Explain both examples in terms of what the original symbiotic relationship was and what symbiotic relationship it became. You may begin to prepare your response after the beep.
Here, well, before we stop it, you see the reading passage again. So you don't need to take notes of the reading. What you need to take notes from is from the listening part, because the listening is heard only one time. So here you need to put into practice how to take notes.
Please begin speaking after the beep.
Then you have 60 seconds to answer the question, and it says that you have to explain both examples in terms of what the original symbiotic relationship was and what symbiotic relationship it became. Here I recommend you to use your own words. Don't worry about those terms. Try to copy them as you heard them, because here they're not going to check your spelling, just the pronunciation. So try to copy them the way you heard them, and then you pronounce them. Okay, all the terms or difficult terms that were mentioned. That would be my advice on this part.
Exercise S32. identifying important points in a reading passage. Now read a passage about an incident leading up to the American War of Independence. You have 45 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now.
Remember, we are practicing, so we might take more than 45 seconds. Let's read the passage. The Boston Tea Party of 1773 was not a tea party at all, but the first major act of defiance on the part of the American colonists against their British rulers. The British Parliament under King George III had imposed taxes on the colonies. A party of prominent citizens disguised themselves as Native Americans and secretly boarded ships that were laden with tea. They then threw the entire cargo of tea overboard. This incident was a prelude of the American War of Independence. Some important ideas are the Boston Tea Party, the year 1773, the British rulers, the British Parliament that imposed taxes on the colonies. Then we have the citizens disguised as Native Americans, the tea that was thrown overboard, and that this was a previous incident to the American War of Independence. You can write maybe a couple of important points that I didn't include.
Exercise S33. Identifying important points in a lecture. Now listen to part of a lecture on the background to the American War of Independence.
I'd like to address the questions of why the American colonists chose to dress as Indians and why they chose tea to dump overboard. Well, let's go back to why the British had imposed taxes on their colonies. Governments impose taxes to meet expenses. The French and Indian War was over after having doubled the British national debt and leaving the colonists in an economic crisis. Now, remember that the French and Indian War consisted of the French and Indians fighting the British and British colonists. To replenish the treasury, a scheme was passed in the British Parliament in which all goods had to be stamped, a stamp that had to be paid for. This was taxation without representation, and the British colonists wouldn't pay it. After a series of different imposed taxes were met by protests, riots, and boycotts, all taxes were eventually revoked, except for one on tea. Now I think you can see the significance of dressing as Indians, since the taxes stemmed from the French-Indian War, but also why it was tea that was thrown overboard.
Some important points on the lecture that we can write down are that the war caused debt and economic crisis, that there was a difference between who had to pay taxes. British rulers didn't have to pay, but the colonists, they had to. Then the colonists protested, and that at the end all taxes were revoked except the tea, the taxes on the tea.
Exercise S34. Analyzing the task that relates to the lecture. The professor gives the background information about the incident that was the prelude to the American War of Independence. Explain how the events were related to the colonists' behavior.
Here we have to state a topic, and that one is going to be the background to the American War of Independence. Then we have to state the events. So first we had the Tea Party, then the war, the imposition of taxes. Now the relationship. So we can say that the citizens, they dress as Indians to represent the French-Indian War, and throwing the tea overboard because it was the commodity being taxed in that moment. Now exercise S35 and S36 on page 346. Here you see planning your speech and recording it. This is for you to practice. I'm not going to evaluate this. You're not going to complete it, but you can do it as practice. We are about to finish the video for this week's topic about the speaking integrated task. I know speaking can be hard, and maybe it's one of the most difficult skills to master. I encourage you to practice every day. Take into account all the topics that I have given you and that other teachers have given to you, and practice as much as you can with your friends, with your classmates. Remember to watch this video before our next Zoom class. I hope to see all of you there. Please don't forget, and prepare your materials, work on the book, and if you have any questions, please contact me and I'll be answering you as soon as possible. Well, this is all for this week. Boys and girls, take care. See you later. God bless you. Bye-bye.